Hello, everyone, and welcome to this In the Case webinar series. My name is Nathan Furr. I'm a professor of strategy at INSEAD, and we love this series because it allows us to go really deep on a case, an example of a real situation where we've gone deep to understand the what and the how, and we get a chance now to talk about that with you. And of course, this is part of INSEAD's case publishing. INSEAD is one of the global case publishing leaders, so we're very proud of that at INSEAD. By the way, at INSEAD, it is an exciting time. As you may know, we've won a Nobel Prize as an institution. Well, one of our members won the Nobel Prize. So we're very excited about that. And we're excited that Digital at INSEAD is helping us to get this message out. So let's dive into our case today. This case is about making AI transformation work. We wrote a case with Arjan Blok, CEO of the Netherlands Lottery, and Steven Koolen, a partner at Spark Optimus, because it was one of these rare cases that allowed us to really get into the how of digital and AI transformation. Now, back when we wrote it 2 or 3 years ago, AI was part of the story. It wasn't center stage. Now AI has become center stage. But what differentiates this case is it's less about the what, because I think we all are getting a good sense of the what, and more about the how. Now, just as in life, it's always full of uncertainty, change, and surprise. We've had a little bit of uncertainty in our own end. Arjan, unfortunately, has had a personal emergency he's had to take care of, and so he will not be joining us. But the good news is Stephen has been there every moment of the way, and I've been there as a professor studying this. So we are going to be able to share the stories and insights you would have gotten, and all our best wishes go out to Arjan and thank him for his support of this case. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to set the stage for AI transformation. And there's a lot of conversation going on right now. On the one hand, you hear these stories about disruption is nigh at hand any moment. On the other hand, not a day goes by, I don't get asked the question, is AI overhyped? So being a professor, and teaching. I'm based on the Fontainebleau campus. I have to have a few slides. And by the way, we've heard from you that you like slides as well, so don't blame me. I want to get into the making AI transformation work, and I want to share a bit of background on myself, and then I'll introduce Stephen, and we'll get into the case. So I joined INSEAD about a decade ago. I started my career in industry. I've worked in real companies, and that's important because it helps me understand the challenges, the functions and dysfunctions of real organizations inhabited by real human beings. But at some point, I knew there was more to the story. I wanted to go deeper. And I went and did my PhD at Stanford University in Silicon Valley. And so I've been following digital and AI for many, many, many years. Joined INSEAD, and my work is really around these questions of innovation. How does innovation happen? How do we get ideas? Test ideas, win support for our ideas? How do we even navigate the uncertainty around new things and around transformation? But also, of course, AI and digital disruption, which I'm excited to talk to you about today. As I mentioned, I think we're just at a really interesting point. I'm reminded of the speed of technology change because sometimes to help people understand my interests, I like to talk about my big claim to fame, and that is that the founders of Instagram were my students. So if you use Instagram, you can thank me or blame me. I have 4 kids and they're all young adults. And so I kind of curse the founders of Instagram because of how much time they spend on their phone. But that question of how does a technology emerge, how does it evolve, how does it come to dominate, are all the kinds of things I like to take a look at. And we're in the middle of that right now with AI. I love to paint this divide that we see. On the one hand, you see the proponents of AI, say the CEO of Google and Alphabet, saying that AI will have a more profound impact on humanity than fire, electricity, and the internet. Wow, that's big, right? That's a pretty bold statement. On the other hand, many of you, I'm sure, saw the news about this report that's associated with MIT that claimed that 95% of Gen AI initiatives have delivered zero value. Okay, so that's an interesting puzzle. On the one hand, this is supposed to be bigger than the internet. On the other hand, 95% of the initiatives are delivering zero value. That feels confusing, and it should be. And what I see in my research and teaching is that established organizations, that's my focus, are falling into three traps. Now, we're going to focus on the first of these three traps today, but we'll have another tech talk in which we go through all three traps. So look forward to that. But one of the biggest traps I'm seeing, and every trap is motivated by a good motive, is what I would call the disruption trap. So all you have to do is type in the term disruption, and you'll see all this frantic energy and fear about being disrupted. We need to disrupt or be disrupted. And no technology is the epitome of that more than AI. The feeling that AI is giving people is that unless your company is 98% AI today, you're already dead. And that creates immense amount of fear and anxiety. And let's think about some of the problems with that message. How do you respond when you are afraid? I mean, really afraid. Do you do your best thinking? Do you make wise strategic choices? Or do you do what most people do? For example, when they have stocks and they fear they're going to go down, they sell at the wrong time, they buy at the wrong time, they make choices that are not well informed by thought, reason, and strategy. So the big trap I see is people are afraid of being disrupted, which is a good sensitivity. It's a good anxiety to be saying, I need to be on the alert of how the world is changing and how I should change. But then what they do is they leap into the abyss. They say, I must just need to do this and trust that it will all work out. And then they fall. And this disruption trap is happening because they've leaped before they've looked, or they've moved before they've thought about a few essential questions. Number one, we have to remember AI is a technology, it's a tool to make sense of large amounts of data. It is not magic. It feels like magic to the general public because a tool like Perplexity or ChatGPT, which are this class of large language models, have essentially made sense of this massive source of data, everything that's on the internet. But we forget that it's really just a correlation machine. It's predicting what is the next word. And so it's not magic. It's a tool for making sense of all that repository of data on the internet. So in that sense, it can be very useful for certain tasks, but it all rests on this simple fact. It is a tool for making sense of large amounts of data. And what I am finding is that in the vast majority of cases, the executives coming to me are being asked to deliver AI transformation, but they don't have the data. So they're being asked to use a tool for making sense of large amounts of data without having the data because they haven't first done the digital transformation that would make that data available to them. Now, I want to be clear. There are absolutely cases where you can use AI without having data. For example, you can use AI to increase purportedly the productivity of your coding activities. Or maybe you could use AI to help you develop a contract. But remember that AI is using data available to everyone, and therefore it, by definition, almost cannot be a source of competitive advantage because what is strategy? Strategy is why does one firm, person, country, whatever unit you want to choose, do better than another? And what's our explanation? It's about being different. So you can use the tool and you should use the tool. But if you're using all this publicly available data, it's unlikely that will give you a lasting advantage. Of course, you have to use it to keep up. But if you want to use this tool to create advantage, then you need to start getting inside your organization and asking, what data do we have? And to do that, you need to do the digital transformation piece. So let's get into this how, because why is it that so many organizations have not done it? because it's hard. So this is where I really want to get in and start talking about this case of the Netherlands lottery. And for that, I'd like to introduce my co-author and INSEAD alumni, Steven. Steven, I want to thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here. As I mentioned, Steven is an INSEAD alum. We're very proud of him. He's done a lot of fascinating things, but maybe Steven, tell us a little bit about yourself so we know where we're going and who we're going on this journey with in
Yeah,
this case.
thanks for the introduction. And I think good that you set it up, Nathan. I think we'll repeat a lot of the lessons from a different time, but in this day and age. So I'm Steven. I'm part of a company called Spark Optimus, and indeed been an alumni from 2011 J of INSEAD. And before that, I actually was focused on technology first, but I found out that I love technology, but I like business even more. And I actually think it's called digital. What's your digital strategy? I think it's actually, or digital transformation. It's not, as you said, Nathan, not a goal in its own. Let's talk about business transformation in a digital or in an AI age. And that has always had my interest. So, yeah, and I love to have joined. I met Nathan, when did I meet you? 5, 6 years ago. Loved our conversations more on the content side, but also to join you in class to share our different cases.
Yeah, great to have you, Stephen. Now, to set a little bit of context, we are going to be talking about the transformation of the Netherlands lottery, which, as you can hear from my accent, I am an American by birth. And one thing, Stephen, I was a little confused about is sometimes people had a little bit of aversion to a national gambling organization. And I felt like they didn't quite fully understand the mission of the Netherlands lottery and where that money goes to. It felt to people like somehow the Netherlands lottery was tricking people and then taking that money and, I don't know, buying yachts in some fancy location. What is really the purpose of the Netherlands lottery as an organization? Where does that money go and how do they operate? Could you give us a little context on that?
Yeah, of course. Now, so I think that indeed, obviously, it's an industry that exists, but there is some outliers out there. But I think the Dutch lottery is really fundamentally uh, focused on doing good. So they're very focused on sports and society, giving back. But I think they're also and we'll talk about that, the front leading company in this industry in the Netherlands to help fight addiction, right? I think that's the one thing. If you really want to do well, I mean, people want to play. That's something that exists, but you want them to play at the Dutch lottery because they will be safe. They will not. They will be monitored. They will be guided to not get addicted, to respect their privacy and all of that. Obviously, there is a tension because some players in the field are more opportunistic, but I think that this company truly balances. I think we wrote in the HBR article about that, Nathan, of the balance between profit and doing good, and that's, I think, at the heart of this company.
Yeah, I love it. And all of those things are important. Why was I interested in it? Because, as a professor, I'm not particularly interested in the lottery. Here's what I think is interesting for me and for all of you. What I saw was a very standard or archetypal situation, and that is you have an incumbent organization. Let's call it a legacy organization, meaning they've got legacy IT systems, they've got multiple systems. Those systems are old, they're fragmented, the data is not tied together. They're in an industry where they've been able to prosper, but now digital is opening up a whole new field of competitors. So, as you know, those of you who know have seen ads, I see these around France all the time. There are online gambling organizations. And while those were legally prohibited for some time in the Netherlands, they still effectively operated. And then there was a point where they became legal. So, again, you need to do a digital and AI transformation. You've got fragmented legacy IT systems. You don't have a big budget, and you're being threatened by digital entrants who don't have all that baggage. This is a very common situation. And so this is why, to me, the case is very interesting. So, Stephen, I started in my introduction talking about how many people are falling into this trap of leaping into AI and digital without understanding why. So When you reflect on when and why you and Aryan started this transformation, what would you say was key at the start?
Yeah, no, I think you already said it. So I think already at the Dutch Lottery, a lot of things were done with digital, actually also with AI. uh, um, but it was more seen as a tool, and that's the it's really how will it how does it support your strategy, but also how does it impact your strategy, or how should you change your strategy in a context of that this is happening. Okay, to make this practical, like you said. Um, First, the consumers are shifting. They're shifting from buying everything around this in stores, local physical stores, to doing it more on their phone at home or wherever they are. But also, as you said, competitors come up, right? So that combination creates a tremendous shift, and that's enabled by technology because the competitors are pure digital companies. And that therefore we needed to shift the strategy. And the way we make that practical is to start first with really doing a sort of a review and assessment of what is the problem, right? From a customer perspective, but also from a business and all the way organization and technology, because you rightly pointed out, we needed to understand why we needed to change for the customer, but also all the things that you described on the very internally focused people, a lot of meetings, complex technology, all of these things that make it slow as a company to react on that. So that's what we started with it, with to at least articulate the why that made sense, not from let's do a transformation for the sake of it, or let's do something with digital, but how will it impact the company and the people on the ground.
I love that. And you know, you said it very casually, Stephen, but it's really fundamental what you just said. It's not about the technology. It's about how does this technology enable us to serve our customers better and pursue our strategy. And when you paint that as not only an like the why, but that an opportunity, it can be very powerful. In where I grew up in the U.S., there were two big brick and mortar bookstores, Borders and Barnes and Noble. Borders went out of business with the rise of Amazon.com, but Barnes and Noble survived. And there was a recent academic paper on this, and what it concluded is the reason why Barnes and Noble survived is they saw this technology as an opportunity to serve customers better. So I very much hear that in what you were saying. So here's like I want to get a little deeper into this question of when you started and the why. I was going to say, what was the biggest risk in pushing the new strategy? How did you convince the skeptics? There's a lot of skeptics
Yeah.
that digital and data could be a source of advantage.
Yeah, I think that for this, I mean, it's important to understand that at the time this company was doing reasonably well. It's a good moment. It was people were a little bit complacent because they're doing well. It was a regulated industry, so they were not feeling. Most of them weren't feeling the necessity. In fact,
Mm.
the CEO and the CFO did, right, and they did understand that things were looming on the horizon. So I think that the risk was that they felt, and which was probably right in hindsight, is that if you didn't move, you would get stuck and would become irrelevant. And the other risk is, which is very important, is how do we get everybody on with us, right? Even if we articulate this view, it doesn't mean that anything will change if we don't get the people on board. So, so I think what really helped, other than the assessment that I said, is that we tied it to the purpose and tied it. I mean, that's related to sport. So it's not a thing on its own. It's not the technology. It was the reason why we existed. We also made things very tangible for people, how we can take away, because obviously one of the answers will be relevance, but also better way of working. How do we make your life better? So that combination is sort of be clear on the relevance part, which for some people resonated, but also be clear on how can we be better. Better means, like you said, less internal, more customer focused, less siloed, and sometimes very practical, take out meetings. And because a lot of people on the ground felt this tension that they were not doing the right things, or were
Mm.
maybe more busy internally than externally towards the customer. They
Mm.
felt it, but they never did something with it. Doing those quick wins help. And I think I think that basically comes down to two things. One, as a board, as the board of the company, they needed to share the belief. And it's very easily said, because when we ask them, you're going to present next week, you're going to tell the story. They said, yeah, I know this, easy. But then we forced them to tell the story to the board, to themselves. And it turned out they did not exactly have the same beliefs and dream. So if you cannot tell the same story and you're not aligned as a management board, it's very hard to sort of take everybody on the journey and keep straight to this direction. So that's sort of, I think, the top down part that you need to get really right. But obviously, in a good transformation, bottom up and top down, because the board also really doesn't know everything. In fact, they should set the direction, and actually the closest to the fire typically know best what should better. So you need to combine this top downness with bottom up.
Brilliant. I really like a couple things you said there. One of the things is really tying it to what the people inside the organization who have to change care about. One of the biggest paradoxes I feel like in management is that we all know that a big threat, a fire, the burning platform, to use the Nokia example, feels like it motivates people, but it can also scare people because they feel like, oh my gosh, am I going to be replaced? Am I going to be relevant? Is my role going to matter? And what I heard you talk about is you looked at ways people were working that were ineffective, that weren't as tied to the customer, and you tied it to this is going to help you do your work better. But that was kind of at the level of people in the organization. But then you highlighted how the top management needed to have a coherent and cohesive unified story. But that wasn't the only piece either. The bottom up, you also, the people closest to the fire needed to be empowered to make the decision. So it was really at three levels of the organization that you were really tying it to the change that needed to happen. Now, today, we're in the middle of AI transformation. And I think what's really hard about AI transformation is it feels very much like this isn't going to help me, this is going to replace me. So, do you think the why is different in an age of AI? And what would you say are the opportunities you are seeing with AI today?
Yeah. Well, maybe, okay, obviously AI is still happening, so we don't know in hindsight. But I think if you translate this to the Dutch lottery case, and then I may also reflect a bit broader, it is even stronger, right? Because ultimately, this combination of having relevance to the customer and doing good,
Mm.
with competition, with regulation, with consumers even having more expectations or changing and increasing, that why is even stronger. And even the Dutch lottery has even strengthened some of their mission and strategy to reflect that. And therefore AI is more, it will enable someone to play in this, right? And it's as you say, right? If you don't come along, some others might, and you won't be relevant, or you at least you will miss maybe the productivity angle. And if you miss the productivity angle, you're the more expensive or slower, which is a waste. But it's also important that if you don't come along or you don't use it, you might miss this competitive advantage. And I think that in general, that's what I think I see. So one, everybody's training it, right? Everybody gets an account, everybody gets Copilot, they all get training. That's a basic, but it doesn't really, I mean, it changes. Some people get away with some of their basic needs and writing emails and all of those kinds of things, but it does, and it works, but it doesn't move the needle. The second thing is, I think, and you also pointed it out, is you do have to keep up with productivity gain in a sense, right? You do have, there's many use cases, and they could be in coding, as you said, but also in marketing, customer service, and all of those things, which you have to keep up, right? You have to do. The more profound thing is, of course, how will it fundamentally change what you are and what is your, I mean, where will your customers go? For simple, will they be start in Google or will they start in ChatGPT? Maybe in the future, we don't know. Let's see. But also, what will you offer to them in terms of a value proposition that has a competitive advantage?
That's great. So where do you think that, like, I mean, you're doing a lot of work with AI these days. Where do you think the opportunities are to drive value with AI?
Yeah, so I think the competitive advantage part is obviously very specific to a company, right? It's a bit hard to generalize here. So I think that the the best, so there's many, right? There is the personal relevance to customers in customer service, personalization. There's faster time to market, in product innovation, productivity. Now, I think at this moment, when you look at where should I look, it's obviously where's there repetitive and non-value added things happening, and how can I improve that? What you do see is that it's often a combination where there really a lot of value is if you still keep the human in it, right? I mean, we might go with all, I mean, it's going very fast with agentic and all of that. And it might or might not get to a level that a lot of these things will be done on your behalf. But at this moment, the combination of this waste for the customer, for your organization, with keeping the human in the loop works best. And I'll give you an example where just to make this tangible, because it might sound a bit vague.
Yeah.
But another client that I had, it's actually the client that we also went to class with, but I cannot say the name here. So they're a B2B industrial company. So and what they're selling is a product, but mostly they sell a solution to a problem of their client. And it's a technical solution. So a lot of people will call their technical reps who are on the phone for advice. I have this problem. How would you solve it? Now, obviously, the first step of using AI is to make it more self-service. I don't know, a chatbot or something, but a lot of the questions cannot be answered. So the second step is then to still pick up the phone, but take away the administrative part, right? Because after a call, you need to write down this client called and he had this question, and we may want to follow him up for CRM. That take quite some time. So the first two steps takes away costs, right? It's a cost thing, it's a productivity thing. But in that basis, now what they do is by the way, in the US, because in Europe there's privacy concerns, but they have an agent listen into the conversation, not to take over the conversation, but to lively, as they're chatting, suggest questions. Because that helps, because if the agent or the person that responds, or sorry, the rep asks questions back to, oh, is this what you're meaning? Or how would you think about this? The answer becomes better, but it also suggests answers. And the result is that this person can much better help this client, much more relevant. Because in the past, he might have part of the answers, but he needed to look at his scripts, he needed to call his colleague. It's all very inefficient. And now he can immediately, cheaper and better, give an answer. Now, this is a very specific example, but I think it's a nice way to see how this evolves into from only cost and administrative to getting increasingly better for customers.
Steven, that's a great example, and I appreciate it. And I actually personally share your view. I actually got to spend some time with Garry Kasparov. He's that world chess champion who was beat by IBM's Deep Blue, so an early AI system. And he's kind of got obsessed about AI after that. And he spent the rest of his life thinking about AI. And he has a metaphor for what he thinks the future will look like that I actually also believe to be true. And that is, rather than humans being substituted by AI, humans will be the shepherds of AI. So like a flock of sheep, the sheep themselves may not, they're intelligent, but they're not as intelligent as a shepherd, or at least the shepherd directs them how to work. And I'm seeing that in the evolution of multi-agent systems, where we take a task like you just described, break it down into subtasks that are completed by sub-agents and then monitored by an agent. Even in the best multi-agent systems, there's just so much heterogeneity, variety, human judgment out there that you need the human in the loop. And so when people ask me, is AI overhyped? I say yes. But on the other hand, I think there's a longer, slower, more powerful trajectory underneath it. And so we should really play to that. So Steven, I want to get into the how. This is really important because many organizations are struggling with their digital and AI transformations. I got to ask you, what were the hardest challenges in the Dutch Lottery's transformation, which you feel are still true today in AI?
Yeah. So ultimately, I think it's how you organize for it and how you change people, right? It's not that, I mean, obviously, like you described, there was a large change that needed in the core technology landscape, but that was doable. I think the hardest part and the most risky is how do you organize in the right way for it. Having said that, the other thing that was important is having the right data and having the right data foundation to do something with it. In fact, the Dutch Lottery had an immense amount of data, but even then, because they have large part of the market is them, and a large part of the population plays with them. So they have an immense amount of data, but it was largely outdated or not used. If you look now today, I think that the organizational part is still true. The data part is, of course, more profound based on what you described. If you don't have digital, you don't capture data. If you don't capture data, you cannot really sort of get all the value out. So I think that if you break that down, I think the organizational part comes down to, again, I'm going to be the competitive advantage. So I'm going to focus on the customer, build it around customer. I think that
Mm,
we're really clear about what are we delivering and what do we need for that. The second, this was for the Dutch lottery particularly very important because they were very internally focused.
mm,
The right goals and focus, right? What are the goals? Is the goal achieving in transformation? No, it's particular customer or business goals that you want to achieve, which also gives focus, right? And in the case of the Dutch lottery, it's this two-sided, we call the butterfly, financial and purpose in equal, let's say, weight. The organizational thing is very important. So complex problems that go across many functions need to be solved cross-functionally. And in fact, it's a good lesson of something that we might have not done sufficiently well at the Dutch Lottery, also include partners, so outside of your company, because you work with a lot of partners to provide value to your customers. And the fourth is the change. I already talked about it. How do you rewire it? And then the fifth is the data. And again, I think that the data is more profound, and the other four are still 100% true in AI.
yeah. Stephen, you've said something pretty profound that might have slipped by in the course of our conversation, and that is most organizations are organized around their own operations and their own technology. We actually call this the technology mirror hypothesis. And what you're saying is pretty radical, which is you are trying to design around the customer journey. So, like, how do we serve the customer journey looking externally at the customer journey? But then, how do we mirror that internally with how we're organized to solve customer problems? And that's a pretty radical proposition. Like, do you feel like you've seen that work? I mean, is that powerful to do? What does that unlock in an organization when you switch from let's organize around how we think we do work to let's organize around how the customers actually solve their problems?
Well, I think it's a hard problem to solve because you need to constantly balance as a company sort of the skill advantages or the functional skill advantages that you have
Mm,
with the ability to optimize, let's say, end to end. The
mm,
problem if you only do functional is that you optimize, you might get a local minimum, right? You might get only optimize that area. And the practical example in the Dutch lottery is very clear. Marketing has to drive traffic, right, to the app or the website. But that traffic has to be good traffic. So not people who want to do fraud, people who don't no people who should be addicted, and people who are let's convert to players. So
mm.
you need to make, and then you have a good game. So if you don't work together to solve the problem together, you might get good traffic, but it doesn't help you. Or you so. And I think that's, I mean, it's a very hard thing how you balance that, right? How you avoid bureaucracy as you combine the end-to-end thinking with the skill advantages. But it's a critical thing to get right. And
Yeah.
maybe it's also a good thing if you don't think about it from the different areas, it's also a bit easier to say which capabilities do we need to shift, right? Because I mean, if you just look at it at, let's say, marketing, for example, it's harder to see that we need to shift marketing, maybe some marketing people to data people, right? So that's because the data people are in the other departments. So you need to, it helped us, at least in the Dutch lottery, a lot to think about it. What do we really need to provide the value?
Super helpful. Thank you. So I want to touch on another aspect of transformation, and that is the hard fact that transformation takes a long time. I mean, part of the challenge of being human is it's great to imagine change, and in our minds it goes fast, but in reality it takes a long time. I learned this every December 31st when I imagine my new year being full of all these healthy activities, and then it comes time to rise in the dark and go for a run. It's a lot harder to endure. So I would say, how do you ensure you stay on course during this long, I mean, this is a long transformation. And maybe could you just share a moment when you were able to change somebody's mind over the course of this long journey?
Yeah, I mean, it starts with leadership. I mean, you do need to have in this case, CEO and the CFO, but ultimately the entire board believe in this and have this consistent view of where are we going. And then you have to steer, right? Because there's lots of things you don't know. So you have to kind of have a north star, but you also need to actively guide it. A lot of people say change, and then there's a communication email, and this is not how it works. You need to consistently, step by step, rewire it. I think in the case of particularly this lottery, other than the change with people, we called it setting the middle management on the stage, or really enabling that group of people, not only the board members, which was the start, but then after that, people and the champions, have them feel it and guide them and help them to how will my new job look like. That was key, right? Because they are the people close to the fire, but also it's for them, it's very hard. It's very hard for people to reimagine their own job. So you need to help them. And the second question that so you need to be, I think you need to be, put those people on the stage, and you need to be
Mm,
clear on where you're going and pretty consistent and pretty hard. Let's say stick to the principles, but
mhm.
then you need to be flexible on how you get there
Yeah.
because you just don't know everything. And you asked when was a particular moment. Well, I
Yeah.
think that in the beginning, so we had the CEO and the CFO who were quite convinced that we needed to change, but there was a board. And I think one of the board members was not a fan of this transformation. He was like, okay, everything is going well. And yes, I believe in the customer focus, but I don't believe in cross-functional way of working. I don't believe in data-drivenness. It's an art, it's not a science, these kind of things. And so we spent a lot of time. And thank God the person was on the one hand critical, but also very open. And by consistently spending time with him, and proving that it worked, right? I mean, proving that it could yield results. You saw him opening up. And what I really, really liked is the moment that he said, okay, you know what I did? I still don't believe in it, but I signed up for a product owner training. Product owner is in a digital space, of course, very well-known role, which is, I would say, not a board level per se. So he was in a classroom of 25, 30-year-old people. He was 50, a week learning, and that opened his eyes, right? Just to how these people think and how they're different. And now, 5 years later, we did a new transformation, or next step in the transformation. And he came to me, and that was really funny to say, okay, we need to step up, and there's still a lot of things we need to change in this AA, but we need to keep this data drivenness and this cross-functional, because that brought us a lot. And so I think that the change of this leadership and consistently helping them and using different methods is I think the key. Yeah, and the other thing is you need to find the sort of the front running group, a small group. You cannot change the entire organization. So find a small group of front runners where you start doing this test and learn approach so that you can show results.
Gosh, I love that. I mean, we all know the importance of small wins, but sometimes we forget about the fact that everybody wants to be part of something successful. But what I like that you brought was new is to really bring people into the experience, let them see it, let them be a part of it. Because it's kind of easy to criticize it from a distance, but when you get your hands dirty with it, it can be a pretty powerful transformation experience. I've seen that in other organizations that I've gotten to study. So very interesting. I'm holding back my temptation to tell more stories because I know you've got so many great things and so many good things from here. So I want to like generalize from these specific examples and say, okay, so what are you learning about business transformation in the context of AI now? Like what's happening now? I mean, this case is like, very new. It's like 2 years old, but somehow in this modern era, that's like the dinosaur age or something like that. So it's not that I see us making the same mistakes we made 2 years ago and 5 years ago, but like, what are you learning in the context of AI now? What do you think is
Yeah.
do differently today, and what are the pitfalls you want to avoid based on the lessons you've learned?
Yeah, I think there's particularly on the how, there's a lot of things that are similar. Uh, Maybe so again the focus. So maybe translate that to I see a lot of people doing random things basically. Like there's a nice tool again here, it's fancy. Still, like you said, it's still about do we believe is the value? Where's the most profound thing? Because you cannot do everything, and otherwise you get this bit of thousand flowers bloom, and it just doesn't work. Particularly as we both work with these larger existing companies, which are machines that evolved over time. So focus is very clear and the goals. Second is starting small, but even more in AI, I would say that's even more the case because there's a lot of things that we don't know how they work. And also the technology and the innovation goes so fast that if you would spend 1.5 years building, if you look back now, 1.5 years of what some of these technologies were capable of. And today, if you would have spent the last 1.5 years on building something fantastic on the technology 1.5 years ago, it would be almost irrelevant. So I think the testing and learning is very important. I also do want to emphasize this building on top of this proven digital and data infrastructure that you have, right? If you have to build on top of that, that's new, right? I mean, before that was not the case. And intent and how you organize, right? Freeing up the resources, making sure people get the mandate, that you take away some of the barriers is important. And yeah, it takes time. I mean, it does take time. It's not. I mean, quick wins can be very quicker nowadays.
Mm.
But the fuller transformation will take time. And if you wait too long, that's yeah, you might, because there's a learning curve, because it's about how your organization works, you might fall behind.
Yeah. And by the way, to this end, Steven, what we're seeing, I'm also seeing is the real move to separate the kind of transformation of IT systems for registry from the experimentation with AI so that you can move at these different clock speeds.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
what,
I think
yeah.
that's even more important, right? It was already important back in the day, but then it'll still be a bit closer together in a sense. But now it's even more profound how you, because you don't want to make it too different, right? It's not a venture. I think ventures are very difficult things. Like you build on the competitive, you build on the strength that you already have. So if you move it too far away from the reality of the real people, the real customers, or the real employees that are impacted, you don't change what makes you unique. So keep it close, but not too close, right?
Yeah.
That's the key trick to do.
I like that. I like how you said that. Don't change what makes you unique. In fact, build on that, amplify it. Okay, so one of the things that's floating around in the world today is this question about, does data and AI really create value? Are there some examples you've seen inside or outside the Dutch lottery where data and AI have created some value?
Yeah, well, there's tremendous. Let me start with the Dutch lottery and just share some. I mean, I think at the Dutch lottery, they're still at the beginning, right? They've recognized this, as is everybody. But I'll give you just 3 examples on multiple levels. So I think the first is a very simple example. Is like I told you, had to do a new reorganization for the next phase. And as you can imagine, that if you change an organization, there's a lot of communication, lots of information about who's my new boss, different roles, who should I talk to, but also the rights if you're not part of the future company. Those are huge amounts of documentation in a very difficult moment for employees. But if you use a custom GPT, so you program all that knowledge into the GPT, it's very easy for those people to look up their specific question in their context. I think that's a very simple, practical example. Then at the Dutch Lottery, what they're already doing is the faster personalization. So in marketing, which is particularly a space, how can you be better? Well, in the Dutch Lottery, they use a lot of voice actors because they do a lot of movies online, obviously on TV, but also on YouTube or so, and or Instagram. You're probably your friends, your past students. In the past, you would have to hire a voice actor if you wanted to change something, which takes quite some time, days, weeks, and cost. But since it's always the same voice actor, you can train with this essentially your own data. Well, it's the voice actor's data, but you bought it. We trained a model to mimic that voice, and then you can do the voice. You can change the movie in very shortly, and in minutes you can change the voiceover. So the time and the cost become much faster. And I mean, it's only a small part of the entire marketing equation, but it really shows success. And I think that the Dutch Lottery themselves would be most proud of what they do on the doing good part. They have very complex. Like I said, they already had it before ChatGPT and all of that. They have very strong models on predicting and acting on addiction and fraud. And they have improved it so much that they now not only use it for themselves, but they also give it to the government institution to use it with others. So I think that's something that they would be very proud of. That it's not only makes themselves better, and nowadays, but also others.
Wow, that's impressive. And can I clarify, you're using GPTs, trained GPTs to help answer internal employee questions. Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying? Wow, how
yeah.
interesting. To enable the change process.
Yeah, because you have, I mean, if you particularly if your organization change, you have like 120 pages of information, which nobody wants to read, but you want the one thing that's relevant for you.
Wow, how interesting. So that's an interesting use. What about outside the Dutch lottery? Any examples of how you're seeing AI being used to create value or do good?
Well, let me give some. I think the doing good. I mean, there's endless examples that probably you can Google on all the potential use cases in marketing, in product innovation, all of the things, content, customer service. Those are all known. But let me give some examples which I find nice from the good side, because I think the good side of things means what is good for you, right? What makes you unique in doing good to the world? I mean, everybody should probably aim to reduce their footprint, but there is unique things for you. And I think one of the examples that I liked, for example, a bit old one now, but infrastructure. Um, Infrastructure, obviously, the footprint of building the road and so is important, but safety is really critical because if something goes wrong in building, it's really highly impactful. And so safety is at the cornerstone of all of these companies in terms of what's important in terms of society for them, right? You don't want accidents. Now, in the past, there was, of course, when a night shift, for example, worked on the road would come, they had to give a debrief to the next shift to say, well, this and this happened, and this might cause a safety risk. So obviously, I mean, people come out of the night shift, they don't do that, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
why would you want it? At best, you would send it, even formally, you would have to talk to the people, but at best, you sent a text message, everything was fine. But now, or one of the things that I've seen is that they use more text, voice to text interface, which is easier for the people coming out of the night shift, which ask a couple of simple questions and directions to talk about what happened last night.
Hmm.
And that, in fact, in fact, it's super funny because I heard some of these transcripts or read them, and it said, and then did you have something worth noting on the safety? And then most people say no, but, and then the part that came after is most interesting. And the ChatGPT or other, I think they actually used Claude for that. But those models are pretty well in structuring a lot of these reads into something that you can share with the supervisor in the next shift in a structured way to reduce safety. So, I mean, it's a very simple, very small example, but to me, the key is what matters in terms of doing good for you as a company. Where do you make it? It's same as like in travel, that's footprint. In energy, that's the grid and the energy consumption and behavior. In all of these cases, that's where you can use AI to do good.
Brilliant. Love it. So, Stephen, I want to get really quickly touch on some of the questions. And one of these questions will actually address one of the final questions I had for you. But the first question I want to make sure we get to comes from Indra Malwan, and it's been voted up quite a bit, which is I hear this all the time. How do we know that we already have enough data? And that's in quotes. Like, what's enough data or the right framework to capture the data? And I hear in that this eternal tension between this idealized state where we have all the data and where data architecture is perfect and we have all the data definitions perfect, which, let's be honest, is never going to happen, so you could wait forever to get that right. On the other hand, you need to do some of that to actually use the data. So do you have any thoughts or reflections on how to address the fact that data is messy and imperfect?
Yeah, I think the right amount, as you said, is very hard. I mean, I think quickly, I mean, more is better in this in a sense, but you quickly get to I mean, if you capture data on a scale like the Dutch lottery or most companies, if you actually capture it, you quickly come to a sizable thing which you can work with and to make it meaningful. And I think the right thing is how do you make the quality sufficient, right? And I think that most of the time, of course, you need sort of a foundation, you need all the governance things, you also need to um, how do you say slice it up, right? Because there in companies there's a lots of data. There's product data, financial data, consumer data, unstructured consumer data. So if you try to fix everything, slice it up. Think about what matters most. Um, Typically, the financial data is better structured as from the start, but take maybe a domain at a time, depending on, let's say, where you feel is the most impact. And the other thing is very important, I think, and this is a very hard one, but you have to combine using the data with the actually getting the data. Because I mean, it's ultimately, if you don't use it, you can spend a lot of time, but it's also very hard to install the feedback loop to invest in quality data.
Yeah. And Stephen, I will add to what you said. You you hinted at something there I think was really important, which is what is the really useful business case where data could create some value? Because you
Yeah.
will boil the ocean trying to get your data right. So you really got to start with where could this data really create some value for us? And I also like how you mentioned quantity and sorry, quality over quantity. One of the kind of things that's out there in the kind of general zeitgeist, I think, is that because these large language models consume massive amounts of data, that you just need massive amounts of data. But we're forgetting about statistics and sampling theory, that if you have a sample, a high quality sample, it can give you a pretty good estimation of population. In fact, the direction that the big tech companies are trying to go is how do we have less data? So I would just remind folks of that of that kind of issue. So I did want to. Okay, so there's a question about the KPI butterfly in a minute, but while we're on the data topic, Peter asked another great question related to this. So let's hammer it out. He said, when starting an AI transformation, is it better to build new, well-structured data collection systems from scratch, or to try to work with legacy data that's incomplete and messy? This got a lot of votes, and this is a very common
Ooh.
issue.
Yeah, I hate being the consultant and that it depends. I
Yeah,
think it's a crappy answer. Um, Typically, of course, what you see is that as you build a good structured data foundation, so the setup of your technology landscape is that you will build layers upon layers of how you aggregate, filter, and process the data. So probably building that in parallel is a good idea to make sure that towards the future you have better processes and you have better structure to work with it and to filter it. But most of the times I do think that, and it's back to your point, Nathan, of what's the value. It's extremely expensive to get all the data, and it can take a lot of time if you don't know what works. So typically starting with a more MVP approach, which is also sort of a concept from the digital age, which still applies, proving that it works, proving that we can do something, and then building on that data is is sort of better approach first. And in the Dutch lottery, we did the same, right? Because I talk a lot about the organizational transformation and the business transformation, but we kind of had a dual approach of improving business goals, including with data, and in parallel improving the foundational setup of the technology and the data landscape.
yeah, I think that's well said. And just to generalize for everybody, when Stephen is talking about this layers, what we're seeing is the emerging model that seems to be working best is you have a layer which is your IT registry systems. And any of you who are in big enterprises know that, for example, updating your ERP system is going to like one of the longest and most gruesome processes you can imagine. So you have a layer of IT registry that is often very risk averse. And what we're talking about and what we're seeing is a lot of organizations building a data layer on top of that. So they have some sort of platform, where they call it platform, cube, twin, whatever it may be, some way to take data from that IT registry system, clean it, ingest it, and then on top of that, they're building kind of AI applications and different microservices. That just is a kind of abstract representation. What that helps you get out of is get out of that. I have to wait for my IT layer to be updated because it probably never will be By the time you put in, say, a new ERP system, it'll be out of date. And so, but to get more really specific to Peter's question, it's unlikely that you are going to be able to build that data layer in perfection at day one. Instead, you want to say, what's the most valuable area of that data layer that we can start to develop with an eye to the fact that we will create a more complete data layer, and then start spinning that up into applications. So, because part of the life and business, as you know, is you can tell a great story about where we're going in this transformation, but people just cannot support that story without some proof and some evidence. So you need to start building those, so we capture this data from, and then we use that to reduce, call times in the call center from 15 minutes to 3 minutes. And that saved us X amount. Or we use this data on route failures in, when a technician goes out to decrease the number of visits, 60%. And then people say, oh, let's do more of that. So it's,
Absolutely. No,
yeah.
I agree. And that's why I think that building a structure, but then taking, I don't know, one area, one data piece at a time and ingesting that and then building on that, that's typically the best approach.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to touch base briefly on the Dutch lottery, because I think the Dutch lottery introduces a really cool principle that I hope other organizations adopt, and that is that we could actually use data and AI to do good. And maybe in this case, Roger asked this in a specific, so let's be specific, recognizing that what good is, you said this already, will be different for other organizations. But what kind of measures did the Dutch lottery have to balance between doing good and in making people addicted versus money? Tell us a little bit of how you did that, because I think that provides inspiration for other industries.
Yeah, so that's just what we use, the butterfly, as we call it. And you can read on the more detail on the HBR article. Maybe we can send it around in detail, but it basically is the sort of the constant balance between you need to run a good business, right? So that's the commercial and the financial side with doing good, which is a combination of customer satisfaction, but also indicators on fraud and addiction, right? So and it's very important everywhere in the organization, everywhere in this organization, from the board, everybody has those two components in their goals. And down to the floor. Obviously, you also have team KPI specific, but we call it a level playing field. It's very important that that combination exists and that the tension is discussed and steered on. So, and then of course the KPI, it's a butterfly because it's the two sides of the wing, which a butterfly cannot fly without one wing. That's the metaphor. So if we have that and we have all the underlying KPIs feed into those two goals, being profitable because we are a business, and let's say the doing good to customers, then you can steer on that, and all of the other KPIs feed into that.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Steven, and thank you everyone for being here. We're reaching the end of our hour. I just want to remind you that you will all get access to the case if you want to read a little bit more. We have also set out in the chat the article that we've mentioned. I want to thank Steven, Arjan, and the Dutch Lottery for sharing with us the how of digital transformation, and I hope all of you have a wonderful day. Thank you so much. Thank you, Steven.
Thanks, Nathan, for hosting this. It was a pleasure to always talk with you. And I mean, there's more to talk. If there's more questions, I saw a whole bunch. You can somehow reach out to me. I don't know if my details are in there.
Yeah, we'll send out Steven's details if you want to reach out. And thank you again for being with us. And thank you for Digital at INSEAD. Have a great day.
Have a great day.